we are recording is the 24th anniversary when the Twin Towers were imploded, and we're going to discuss the events around 9/11 and the false flag that it really was. Pat, welcome to Power of Prophecy.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Great to be here.
Now, you've got an outstanding article. Let me give the URL for everyone to look this article up. It's a massive article full of information that many of my listeners will know, but there will be some little nuggets that may have been overlooked or never discovered. It is stateofthenation.info/?33162. Look this article up. If not, go to Yandex, go to Google, type in State of the Nation, Pat McShay, all roads lead to Israel, and you will find this article. It is outstanding, and that's why I've entitled the next two programs, Terrorism in America, All Roads Lead to Israel. Pat, you just dive right in with quotes right at the beginning of your article from Bibi Netanyahu, don't you?
Yeah, I do. Bibi made a few statements about 9/11. One of them, he said it was good for Israel that the 9/11 attack happened. And he said that Israel's benefiting from one thing, and that is the attack on the Twin Towers and Pentagon and the American struggle in Iraq. Bibi wanted that war in Iraq. What most Americans don't know is that war in Iraq was planned years before 9/11. They made it seem like weapons of mass destruction and the Saddam Hussein threat were why they just had to go in. But the truth is Israel wanted Saddam taken out, and they insisted on regime change in 6 other countries, but they needed the United States involved. They needed the United States military power to help them because they wanted full spectrum dominance over the Middle East. And the only way they could do that was take out a strong man like Saddam Hussein in Iraq, take out the mullahs in Iran. They wanted to get rid of Gaddafi in Libya. They wanted to get rid of Assad in Syria. And, you know, people should be able to look around today and see that most of these leaders that they wanted gone are all gone now. And Israel has even armed terror groups. It's well known that Israel has funded Hamas. They funded Al-Qaeda. They funded other terror groups like ISIS. And they did that because they wanted to create chaos in these countries that would bring these regimes down. And that's exactly what you saw happen in Syria, where right now they have a terrorist leading the country, a well-known terrorist. In Libya was taken over by terrorists after Gaddafi was killed under Hillary Clinton's direction. And, you know, of course, we have the recent conflict in Iran that Trump was pushed into by Bibi Netanyahu. And, you know, I think we all saw here just recently that Israel just bombed Qatar a few days ago. So they bombed 6 different countries just in the last few months.
Yeah. The bombing in Qatar is, Qatar is one of America's allies. They are leading the peace talks, trying to get everything calmed down, and Israel can't have that because they want greater Israel. The domination, like you said, of the Middle East.
Yep.
But they're rabid, but they are not a superpower like America So it's easier, and well, let's go back. If you think about it, the blood of a Jew is more valuable than tens of millions of Gentiles, Goyim. So that's why they like our boys and our girls to go over there and die for their greater Israel. The Christian Zionists, you've got a quote from Bibi on the Christian Zionists that they are useful idiots.
Yeah, he calls them scum and useful idiots. That's what Bibi Netanyahu and the Israelis, not all the Israelis feel this way, at least 95% of them. And they hate America and they hate Christians. These people need to wake up and smell the coffee here, because all they are doing is using America for their own gains. And they will never agree to any more peace deals that are going to last, because they are committed. Bibi Netanyahu is committed to the Greater Israel Project. That's going to involve a lot more war, stealing more land, and killing more people. A white paper was written for Bibi Netanyahu back in 1996 by a Jew named Robert Kagan. And this neocon group was called the Project for a New American Century, or PNAC. This was a faction of Israeli firsters made up of some Christian Zionists like Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and Jeb Bush, who would, of course, go on to become governor of the state of Florida. But it also included a number of dual Israeli citizens like Mark Grossman, Ari Fleischer, John Bolton, Elliot Abrams, Robert Zellick, Dov Zakim, who would take over as controller at the Pentagon, Richard Pearl and Paul Wolfowitz would go to the Pentagon, all under George Bush's administration, Doug Feith, Dick Armitage, and Scooter Libby. People might remember that name. But Zionists like John Ashcroft, they sought to limit American civil liberties after 9/11, along with dual Israeli citizen Michael Chertoff, who was Bush's Homeland Security Director and the supposed author of the Patriot Act. And the Patriot Act targeted patriots, veterans, Christians, and conservatives. And as we're seeing happen today, Chertoff's mother was an Israeli Mossad agent. His father and his grandfather were Talmud rabbis. And so this unlikely group of radical Israeli firsters would change the course of history, which would spark 2 decades of war for Israel, costing taxpayers right now around $8 or $9 trillion. And most of these guys did that during George Bush's administration 5 years later. And this paper that they wrote for Netanyahu in 96, it called for Israel to abandon their past practices of trading land for peace as a waste of time and resources, and they called for more hostile, aggressive approaches. They would steal the land they desired through regime change and ethnic cleansing of millions of people in the region. They wanted to use the U.S. military to force this agenda the same way they're using their military today to steal land in the Gaza and the West Bank. They're using the U.S. military for strikes in Syria, Iran, Libya. So this new Pearl Harbor type event is what PNAC called for to kickstart their planned land theft, genocide, and war. And 9/11 was that Pearl Harbor type event.
You know, many people, they bought the propaganda, Pat, from controlled media, from the talking heads that were under W and his Israeli cabal. But honestly, has America ever been shown concrete proof that Muslims, that these Arabs that had no clue what was going on, I mean, as far as how to fly and all this other garbage, but there has never been any concrete proof presented to the American people that show that a dude hiding out in a cave in Pakistan orchestrated this whole event to create this Pearl Harbor attack.
Yeah, and that's what I take people through in this new article. Once someone reads this article, and this article is filled with evidence, none of these are conspiracies. I don't talk a whole lot in the article about terrorists because once you find out the truth about 9/11, you realize that these terrorists were just Israeli and neocon props. These guys were patsies, just like, the JFK assassination had a patsy. They had patsies in these guys. And everywhere you look at 9/11, Israeli businesses, Israelis, neocons, these plans were all written by the Israeli. And these terrorists were cutouts that, likely had nothing to do with the planning or the attack. I don't believe they did at all. But 9/11 was government sleight of hand and intentional misdirection. And, what you got, Bush appointed a neocon who was likely a co-conspirator, Philip Zelikow, as the head of the 9/11 Commission. Just 2 years, think about this, just 2 years after the initial plan written by Project for a New American Century that called for a new Pearl Harbor type event to kickstart their wars and regime change, in 1998, Philip Zelikow, along with two other Jewish neocons, Ashton Carter, who would go on to be the defense secretary under Barack Obama, and John Deutsch was the CIA director. Okay, these guys wrote an article, a paper called Catastrophic Terrorism, Tackling the New Danger. They wrote that a catastrophic terror attack on America, such as the destruction of the World Trade Center, would be a transforming event in America, a watershed event in American history that would, like Pearl Harbor, divide our past and future into a before and after. And the after would feature draconian measures, scaling back America's civil liberties, allowing wider surveillance of citizens, and detention of suspects using deadly force. This is the same language that would be used in the draconian Patriot Act just 3 years later. It sure sounds to me like these Jews had a crystal ball. They game planned 9/11. They wrote the Patriot Act long before 9/11. And it's just obvious that, again, if you look for evidence that these terrorists were involved, you can't find any because there just isn't any evidence that any of these guys were involved. Matter of fact, just days after the attacks, they found that 7 of these hijackers that they blamed on 9/11 were still alive. So Muhammad Atta's father, who was supposedly the pilot of the plane that hit the North Tower, his father contacted the media and said that his son had called him 2 days after 9/11. So, these guys weren't on those planes. And everything that we were told about 9/11 was a lie.
Right after that, the Patriot Act was put in place. So we both know that it was pre-planned, that it was already written. They needed an event to propel Americans to give up their liberty for security. And they knew the psychology that was going to come from a terror attack like what happened in New York City, even though it was, self-inflicted, I guess. but they knew the psyche of Americans would go along with more security. So I remember a couple weeks after that, I had to fly somewhere. I'm in the airport. There are National Guard soldiers with M16s in the airport in America. Not Lebanon, not Beirut, not anywhere in the Middle East, but in America there were National Guardsmen armed, locked, and loaded in the airports here in America.
And if you remember, Jerry, the shoe bomber and the underwear bomber, which they used as an excuse to make everyone take their shoes off and get these invasive searches, those were all done under the watchful eye of the same security company that handled all 4 airports on 9/11. The owner of the airport, or of this security company, was also a former Mossad agent. So all of his employees are former Shin Bet Israeli intelligence officers. So, yeah, it's like Philip Zelikow, like a wolf in sheep's, or in charge of the hen house. Zelikow was appointed by George Bush. Here's the guy that was probably in on the plan to destroy the Twin Towers. He wrote about it. He said that there would be a Pearl Harbor type event to take out the towers. Bush put him in charge of the 9/11 commission and he would lead the cover up along with Bush's newly appointed FBI director and longtime deep state fixer, Robert Mueller. Everybody remembers Bob Mueller, who Trump was appointed as the special counsel in the Russiagate hearings and report. So their job, Zelikow's job and Mueller's job, was to steer all of the suspicion away from Israel and towards these Islamic terrorists. It was all in the script. This stuff was all in the script for destroying 9/11. And this was not planned or executed by radical Muslims.
No, not at all.
They planned this false flag, catastrophic terror attack, and they had to sell the war in Iraq to the clueless and unsuspecting American public who were still cheering Israeli puppet George W. Bush's leadership after 9/11. I mean, you cannot make this stuff up.
No, you can't. I know Chertoff had an ownership stake with the company that had all the X-ray machines, and that's another thing, Pat. So we had the underwear bomber, the shoe bomber, so now we got to take off our shoes. Now we have to go through X-ray machines, and people don't even bat an eye today, Pat. When they go to the airport, they stand there like little sheeple, and I'm one of them, because I know if I don't do this, I'm not getting on the plane to go see my grandkids. And I don't feel like driving 17 hours. But we all get X-rayed now to go in, and if one little thing sets off this X-ray machine, you get patted down. And we accept this. That's another, of the Fourth Amendment, the illegal search and seizure. But we willingly did this because of this false flag event. We succumbed to the powers that are over us, that used to work for us, but now we work for them. That's what all of this has devolved into.
Yeah. The whole thing is filled with lies, and anyone that just takes a look at any of this stuff would realize that. And if they would look into some of these things, like the shoe bomber, Richard Reed, he was refused entry onto the plane. He didn't have a proper ID. He didn't have anything that you needed to board a plane. And all of a sudden, a couple guys in suits came out and basically ordered the airline to allow him on the plane. They weren't going to allow him on the plane. That's your shoe bomber. So this whole thing, the shoe bombing, the underwear bomber, those were all false flag events. just like 9/11. And I also point out in this article about the Lavon affair. Most people aren't aware of the Lavon affair. The Lavon affair happened back 70 years ago. Israel was these terror groups like the Irgun and Haganah. These guys, Menachem Begin, the future prime minister at the time, was a member of the Irgun. And what these guys did is they went around blowing up buildings and blowing up train stations and killing civilians, trying to get the Americans and the British to go along with their plans for Israel. People don't understand how Israel was originally set up. So just literally everything about this operation is a lie. And if you look at, Silverstein that bought the building, he bought this building just like 6 weeks before 9/11. And before the Bush family had security, like I said, a former Mossad agent's company ran the security. They had the largest elevator job in the world, complete renovation of the elevators at the Twin Towers that took months and months. And that is probably when the perpetrators put these explosives in the inner core, which if you've got to see how the Twin Towers were set up, and that's another thing that I talk about in here is that what we saw is airplanes, aluminum airplanes, flying through the walls at the Twin Towers. And what people don't understand is that these walls were built with 14-inch steel girders, thick steel. Every 40 inches, there was a 40 or 14-inch steel girder. No aluminum plane is going to go through 14-inch thick steel girders. And behind the steel girders, to make a kind of a tic-tac-toe looking grid, they put thick steel plates that were bolted and welded to the 14-inch steel girders. I'm just here to tell you that if an aluminum airplane of any size going 500 miles an hour would hit that wall, fold up like an accordion, and the wings and the 50-foot tall tail section, those planes had a 5-story tail section. They would have broken right off and fallen crumpled to the ground, just like the plane would have crumpled up and whatever was left of it would have fallen to the ground, along with all the engine and the plane parts and all that. And even the hole in the side of the building that they showed with smoke coming out of it, you see no plane parts, and the holes are only about half as long as the wingspan of a 757. So did those wings, that extra 60 foot of wing, did that collapse and fold into the tiny hole at the Twin Towers? Of course not. So we're asked to believe ridiculous things about what these planes did, which I call magic planes in my article, because they had to be magic planes to fold up like a Looney Tunes cartoon and go into a tiny hole.
Yeah, I heard not long after a number of documentaries were made, and they talked about hologram images being put out, and some people have said that CGI could have been involved because nobody has, we had cell phones back then. Nobody took any pictures of these planes pummeling the Twin Towers, but we've got video footage from media. So is it possible? You know, I never really dug into the hologram aspect of that. I kind of dismissed it as a conspiracy theory, but it's
yeah. But a lot of people like John Lear, who I've read and watched his videos for years. He died recently. John Lear had flown every plane that was flown on 9/11. He was a longtime CIA pilot, longtime commercial pilot. His grandfather invented the Learjet. Jim Fetzer, the founder of Scholars for 9/11 Truth and a friend of mine, he believes that airborne holographic projection was used on 9/11. And most Americans are unaware that the U.S. Air Force had advanced hologram technology years before 9/11. And I point out one of the witnesses who said that he saw the plane go into the building and come out the back of the building. Well, I think that was CGI messing up there because A, that plane could never have gone through those twin towers, the first wall, much less go all the way through the building and come out the other side. The story is so absurd. It's just hard to believe anyone bought it, but they did. And, you know, there's a great, I linked to a few different articles in my article that people need to check out. I also put a short video of an aluminum F-4 Phantom jet hitting a concrete wall at 500 miles an hour. And people need to watch that and see what happens. But any video that shows an aluminum airplane with a fiberglass nose cone gliding through steel and a concrete building violates Newton's law of motion. So I'm firmly in the no plane camp for a lot of reasons. I think that the Pentagon was hit by a Global Hawk missile. People can see the article. There's no way a plane of the size of a 757-200 with its 159-foot wingspan hit that building. So it's just embarrassing that people believe this stuff.
Well, Pat, if you think back, because back in the day when people listened to the radio, they didn't have TV. Their power of discernment was so powerful that when this new medium came out, known as television, the dumbing down started because pictures are worth 1,000 words, Pat. These same people that are buying the Twin Towers being hit by aircraft are the same people that believe we landed on the moon.
Right.
Now they're starting to ask questions, and NASA is starting to admit, and now the pieces of the puzzle are coming together, and the tapestry that they have put together is being torn to shreds. And, Pat, we have flown through 30 minutes. We're going to have to take a brief pause. My guest today is Pat McShay. We're discussing terrorism in America. All roads lead to Israel. You're listening to Power of Prophecy. Stay with us, won't you? We'll be right back. Hello, friends. Jerry Barrett back with you again. I want to tell you about this outstanding 4-DVD docuseries that we are offering entitled Sacrificing Liberty. This stunning documentary examines the tragic attack on the USS Liberty by Israeli forces on June 8, 1967. The true story of the USS Liberty is more shocking than any spy novel ever written by Tom Clancy. It was the most top-secret spy ship in the world, and its client was the NSA. The ship, with 294 souls aboard, were rushed to the Mediterranean Sea. Only the White House and Pentagon knew that Israel was ready to attack Arab nations. The USS Liberty was deliberately sent into a kill zone. The casualties were staggering. 34 killed, 174 wounded. The cover-up began as soon as the attacks started. And until now, the true story has never been allowed to be told. The aging survivors have finally been allowed to tell the true story. And sacrificing liberty sets the record straight. The truth told for the first time about Israel's massacre of the crewmen aboard the USS Liberty. There is lost video footage seen for the first time in decades. There are shocking first-time eyewitness testimonies from the men who survived this heinous attack. There is gut-wrenching descriptions of the carnage unleashed by the Israeli gunboats and Israeli warplanes. It connects the dots that link Lyndon Baines Johnson to the failed false flag operation to start a war with Egypt. Uncensored USS Liberty crewmen tell their true stories for the first time in 53 years. What was the role of Senator John McCain's dad in the cover-up? This docuseries also uncovers LBJ's Mossad mistress in the White House. This is a powerful documentary. 4 parts, only $30. Please add $6 shipping and handling. That will make your total $36 for Sacrificing Liberty. You can order your copy by phoning us toll-free in the United States and Canada at 1-800-234-9673. Again, that's 1-800-234-9673. If you care to phone our regular line, that number is 512-263-9780. We're in the office Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. If you don't get us, please leave your name, number, and a brief message, and we will call you back as soon as we possibly can. We accept Visa, MasterCard, Discover, and American Express. You can use those charge cards at our secure shopping cart at powerofprophecy.com, powerofprophecy.com. There's an ad for Sacrificing Liberty right there on the main page. Click on it, put in your name, address, charge card, shipping method, hit submit, we'll get it and get it coming to you. Now, if you care to send in a check, money order, or cash, please make your check or money order payable to Power of Prophecy, and you can mail it to us here at 4819 R.O. Drive, Suite 102, Spicewood, Texas, and our zip code is 78669. $36 postpaid for Sacrificing Liberty. Okay, and now let's return to our regular program. My guest today is Pat McShay. Pat, welcome back.
Hey, Jerry, it's great to be here.
The director of studies at the Army War College in 2001 was Dr. Alan Sabrowski. And he's Jewish, isn't he?
Yeah, he is. And he came out after 9/11 because he was privy to information about 9/11 and likely had heard that they were doing simulations at NORAD on attacks on the Twin Towers. Sabrowski was a Jew, and he was the director of studies on 9/11 and at the Army War College. And he said, not only him, but he said many of his peers believe the same thing he does about Israel and 9/11. But what people don't know, there's so much in my article that will just shock people. Once you read this information, you just can't look away. 6 months before the COVID-19 PSYOP was unleashed on the world, they had a simulation event called Event 201, and it was attended by Bill Gates and representatives of the Rockefeller Foundation, the World Economic Forum, and Johns Hopkins University. They game planned what would happen if a highly contagious respiratory virus that they created in a lab using gain-of-function technology spread throughout the world, and looked at different scenarios and solutions to all the chaos that they planned to engineer against the American public. The same thing happened with 9/11. They had simulations, at least 3 different simulations at NORAD involving the Air Force and involving the U.S. military, that the simulation was airplanes flying into the Twin Towers. And in one of them, at least, they even had a culprit behind the attack on the Twin Towers, and that was Osama bin Laden, who, again, most people don't know. Osama bin Laden was a CIA operative and had been since the 80s. A lot of people don't know that the Bush family was good friends with the bin Laden family going all the way back to the 70s. Salem bin Laden, Osama's brother, was a partner in Arbusto Energy, owned by George H.W. Bush, the president's father. And the morning of 9/11, George H.W. Bush, the former president, was having breakfast with another brother of Osama bin Laden. So you just can't make this stuff up. These guys were all either involved or knew about what was going on. They had game planned it. They wrote papers spelling out exactly what they wanted to do. They listed the target. They listed what would happen. This was a Hegelian dialectic.
I'm going to say that was Hegelian dialectic par excellence.
Problem, reaction, solution. 9/11 was a problem, reaction, solution because they created the problem. They waited for the public's reaction, and then they came in with a solution, which was, taking away our civil liberties, the Patriot Act, going after certain groups. That's what another false flag attack was all about. The Oklahoma City bombing was meant to demonize white Americans and the militia movement. So, this was a whole problem, reaction, solution. They wanted to take us to war, and that's what 9/11 was all about.
Everything comes out in the wash at the end. The fact that Silverstein had just bought the building. The sale was approved by a Jew who was in charge of the Port Authority. The building was packed with asbestos. It had been condemned. Silverstein was looking at hundreds of millions of dollars just to abate. You look at all of the first responders that were on the ground when the towers were imploded. Yes, the towers were imploded. They were covered in asbestos. All you saw was the dust. And I'm sure there's garbage that was in the concrete that was part of the particulate that was in the air. But the firefighters that are dying and have died from lung cancer. And they know asbestos causes lung cancer. So Silverstein and his partner, Lowy, they made out like bandits with the insurance payment for having a building, less than 2 months?
About 6 or 7 weeks, and they cleaned out the insurance companies for $4.5 billion despite only putting up 14 million of their own money. So, and the thing is again, Silverstein was a Jewish billionaire. Frank Lowy was a Jewish billionaire who was once a member of Israel's Golani Brigade, and he was also a member 40 years earlier of a Jewish underground terror group, the Haganah, that I talked about earlier.
Yeah.
The chairman of the Port Authority that owned the building, Eisenberg, was another Jew. He was another friend of Bibi Netanyahu's. And Richard Lauder was another guy that negotiated the deal with Silverstein, was another Jew who was another friend of Bibi Netanyahu's. So these guys were all connected. Every single one of these guys was a member of a terror group. They were connected to the Israeli Mossad. And not only that, all these guys were connected to Jeffrey Epstein, including Lex Westman and all these guys that were, or Les Wexner's mega group that was associated with Jeffrey Epstein's sex trafficking operation. So these guys, and Louis Eisenberg was a board member of the United Jewish Appeal Federation in New York that was the biggest Israel fundraising body in the entire country.
So all the names that you just listed, none of them sounded Muslim, Pat.
No.
Is there a pattern?
Yeah, and again, that is exactly why I don't talk about the terrorists, is because these guys were just patsies. They were just props.
You're talking about the terrorists, but you're talking about the terrorists. Lowy, Silverstein, Wexner.
Right.
Those are the terrorists. And
Zellico, and Dick Cheney, and Donald Rumsfeld. All these guys that America turned to were involved. There's no doubt about it.
Chertoff.
If you read this, Chertoff. If you read this article, it lays bare who is involved. Ari Fleischer was up to his eyeballs in foreknowledge of 9/11, and he still goes on Fox News every night acting like he's America first. None of these guys are America first. It's all about the Greater Israel Project. They have to act like they like us because we send them billions and billions of dollars every year.
Exactly. It's not anything that benefits America. It's what benefits Israel. And
none of it.
We haven't even touched on Building 7.
No.
But neither did the 9/11 Commission, did it?
The 9/11 Commission didn't mention Building 7 at all, likely because it didn't get hit by a plane, and they had to explain how a 47-story building that was built about 10 years after the Twin Towers. This was a newer building, and it had also just underwent renovations like a year before this happened. This is a building that housed the FBI. Rudy Giuliani's office was in Building 7. A lot of important government buildings were in this tower. And what people don't know is that the CNN and the BBC both reported that Tower 7 had collapsed almost 30 minutes before it actually collapsed. In a free fall speed collapse, 6.5 seconds. This 47-story building collapsed We're told because of some scattered fires in the building. Well, they don't talk about Barry Jennings. Barry Jennings was in his office after they had told people to vacate Building 7. He was there on the morning of 9/11. And he said that large explosions rocked Building 7 while he was still in the building. He was with a couple of other guys, and he said that numerous explosions were going off, and this is in the morning. This is before either of the Twin Towers had collapsed. So they probably were trying to collapse Building 7 that morning, and something went wrong. Jennings reported that he and a couple other people that he was with had to step over dead bodies in the lobby just to get out of the building. This contradicted the official government claim that no one died in Building 7 or that office fires had caused the collapse, because 8 hours later, the building collapsed 8 hours after these initial bombings went off. And Jennings would mysteriously die 2 days before the official NIST report was released. So, and here about 5 years ago, I wrote in another article I wrote about 9/11 that not only was part of the mountain of evidence about this is Building 7 and this ridiculous 6.5 second free fall, that they did a new 4-year study on the 47-story collapse. And they said they concluded the only way Building 7 could have collapsed in free fall speed was through the use of explosives. So that means that the buildings had to have been wired weeks before to do a job as big as this job. They would have had to wire this to implode weeks before 9/11. That's more foreknowledge, right?
Exactly. If anybody has ever studied controlled demolition, and if you consider the amount of steel that was in the Twin Towers to keep the building, it swayed because of the jet stream blowing the top of the building. It would sway, but it was designed to absorb the energy from the wind to sway these towers so they wouldn't collapse on each other. So you know that the steel structure, the bones of the building, were extremely strong. And I'm sure the Building 7 was built with the same meticulousness that the Twin Towers were. It takes months, because you have to analyze the interior structure, not the walls, not the glass, none of that. That doesn't matter.
Yeah.
If you're going to control the demolition, you have to know the stress points and places where you need to discharge to cut the beam to have it fall straight down on another. It is an art form. And now we can go back to the Murrah building. That was just a haphazard, let's just set a bunch of bombs and we're going to blow the front half of this building off. That was kind of a haphazard deal, but the Twin Towers being in downtown Manhattan, they couldn't afford for collateral damage to go willy-nilly and not be able to control it. So you set the charges, and they are in sequence. And if you've ever watched how these guys do these demolitions, it's intense. But the amount of preparation it takes. So you said that they did the elevators in the Twin Towers. That gave them access to all parts of the internal structure to set their charges. There is no way Building 7 was thrown together, threw a bunch of bombs, and let's just get it collapsed. This is in any other city, it would be a skyscraper.
Oh yeah, it would be the biggest building in 95% of the cities in America. And Silverstein, the crazy thing is, people can look this up on YouTube. Larry Silverstein admitted on 9/11 that Tower 7 was a controlled demolition. In an interview on national television, he said, quote, "I got a call from the fire department commander and told him because of the tremendous loss of life, the smartest thing to do is pull it," which is a demolition term for bringing the tower down. And they made the decision to pull it. He's saying the fire department made the decision to pull it. And I said in the article, yeah, since it takes weeks to set the explosives to wire a building that size, well, when did they wire it? And not only that, Silverstein took out a terrorism rider on the insurance policy above his regular policy. And then even later, the commander that he said he talked to came out after he heard what he said. And he said, I quote, "I am well aware of Mr. Silverstein's statement, but to the best of my recollection, I did not speak to him on that day. And I do not recall anyone telling me that they did either." So he's saying, Larry's a liar. You know.
That should be a dead giveaway.
Yeah, but it didn't matter because the fix was in. All they wanted to do was, keep the terrorists bad. We've got to get the terrorists. Show another picture of Osama bin Laden or Muhammad Atta. Let's keep showing Muhammad Atta because he's got a real scary looking face, Just all day long, you saw those two pictures. So, yeah, it was ridiculous. And they proved that Tower 7 was blown up. But that was years later, and no one cares anymore. You tell somebody that, and they're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, the best thing to do is cover up the narrative. So there was a Fox reporter, and I know you mentioned this in the article, and I'm sorry I can't remember his name. He did a 4-part series, and you said that they aired once. I only remember seeing 2 of the 4 episodes air before Fox pulled it, and it 86'd it. I mean, just deleted the entire thing.
Yeah, I think that they got word from Bibi or the Israelis to take it down, and they took it down.
And I would love to have a copy of that now. 24 years later, that evidence is so damning that this was not a terror attack from Osama hanging out in some cave in Pakistan, but just like what happened at the Murrah building, just like what happened at JFK in Dealey Plaza, this was a planned event to rally the troops, and I'm going to tell you, it brought out more patriotism in Americans, the fact that we were attacked by these ragheads, these Muslims, these evildoers.
For people that don't buy some of this, they can go on YouTube, or they could recently. They have videos of the local reporters in Oklahoma City that morning talking to the bomb squad. And the guy says right there on TV, he says, yes, we found several unexploded bombs that didn't go off. So the bombs were planted in the building. Matter of fact, General Benjamin Parton, who was a bomb expert, was in Oklahoma City the day after the bombing. And he said that the fertilizer bomb didn't cause the damage. And he said it was obvious that the bombs were planted in the building. Yet, what do we do every year on 9/11? We teach the fairy tale. We're still talking about Osama bin Laden. We're still talking about, these guys in Oklahoma City, Timothy McVeigh. These are all fairy tales. These were all done to propose new legislation to take away Americans' rights and civil liberties. That's just all there is to it.
Yes, sir. If you have any doubt, remember what happened with John F. Kennedy's body. They did a real quick hush-hush kind of autopsy. Oh, he's dead. Okay, that gunshot wound, blah, blah, blah. Then they had to go into the Warren Commission and change some ballistics travel and fabricate some stuff, but they got rid of the hard evidence quickly. What happened to the Murrah building? They didn't even complete the investigation before they imploded and got rid of any other evidence of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City. What did they do with the Twin Towers? As soon as they came down, they started cleaning up. There was no investigation.
Oh, you're probably familiar, too, with Officer Terrence Yankee at Oklahoma City. He was a whistleblower that saw them taking plastic explosives into the Murrah building, and he was blowing the whistle after the explosions, and they murdered him, and they called it a suicide. I mean, if you read the autopsy report, which I did, this guy was murdered, man. He did not kill himself. So, and like William Rodriguez, who worked as a maintenance worker in the North Tower for 20 years, he said he was knocked off his feet by a massive explosion when he was in one of the basement levels of the Twin Towers. And that was before the tower was hit by the airplane. So the bombs were already going off before the Twin Tower hit. And he said that the media would not discuss the bombs in the building with him. And he said that the 9/11 report didn't have any of his testimony about the bombs in the building. Louis Caccioli was a 20-year fireman that worked at the World Trade Center. And he said all of the firemen heard hundreds of explosions going off all over the buildings. And he said that the investigators treated him like a suspect. And he said none of his testimony or any of the other firemen's testimony was included in the final report. So it was obvious that Philip Zelikow was demonizing anyone that didn't go along with their predetermined outcome.
That's man's response, time immemorial, Pat, is if anybody contradicts or whistleblows, we have to eliminate. It just we have to cover it up so we can have the narrative that we need, because they really wanted us to go in, take out Sodom, throw the Middle East in complete upheaval, allow Israel to go about willy-nilly and bomb and destroy and genocide entire populations just to keep their greater Israel plan on track. It's just, man, Pat, we have got so much more we need to cover. We are through with this hour. Man, it just flies by when Pat and I get together. And
wow, it did go by quick.
It always does, brother. I will have Pat on again next week. We will continue this discussion, Terrorism in America, All Roads Lead to Israel. Pat and I want to thank you for tuning in and giving us an hour of your time. We greatly appreciate it. And as always, I pray you will tune in again next week at this same time. Tune in and discover the power of prophecy.